About a year ago, I set out on a quest to turn Starfield into a Star Wars game. I installed dozens of mods, transforming the game into something that kind of resembled Star Wars if you squinted real hard at it. But since then, the modding scene has gone so much further. Now there's a mod list you can install that radically overhauls everything from the characters and planets to the quest dialogue and factions. It's called Genesis, and while it's still rough around the edges, I think it could be one of the most impressive modding projects that I've ever played. Let's check it out. So calling Genesis a mod list is kind of a disservice to just how extensive it is. Most mod lists are mainly just a curated collection of mods with their settings tweaked to fit a certain look or feel. And in the past, I've looked at mod lists for, say, Fallout 4 and Skyrim that turn them into almost next-gen titles with a totally different atmosphere and totally revamped graphics. But Genesis takes things so much further. It's still a collection of mods curated by the author, but it also includes an extensive rework of the game's main missions with new dialogue that fits into the Star Wars universe. And this isn't just new text dialogue, it's also complete remakes of the actual voice lines for many of the major characters and NPCs.
The three of us are heading to Dantooine, first settled planet of the Rebel Alliance, and, not coincidentally, the home of their capital, Dantoo Town.
According to the mod list's author, this was achieved in part with 11 Labs AI tools. This is a disclosure on the mod list website, and the author says that they'll remove any AI voices that the original voice actors object to. Now, the real thing to note here is the quality of the final product. Starfield's writing tended to be very, well, let's be honest, boring, with characters monologuing constantly and rarely giving you meaningful information. With the new quest dialogue and overall arc more focused on Star Wars content and themes, the characters have been rewritten to be more direct, while also name-dropping some major Star Wars planets like Geonosis and Dantooine.
Come on. Life on Geonosis ain't hard enough.
But they aren't just referencing distant planets that don't exist in this game. The actual planets in Starfield have been converted into these locations, and the effect is kind of stunning. Aquila City has been transformed into Dantoo Town, featuring lush trees and a harsh rocky terrain. Likewise, New Atlas has been turned into Coruscant, and it's actually insane how much of the city has been reworked. There's shady alleyways, dingy bars full of scum and villainy, with stormtroopers of course patrolling the streets. Plus, all of the NPCs have gotten the Star Wars treatment, adding all sorts of alien species and new clothing options to the game. It's really impressive stuff, especially when you look up and realize that the city extends for miles above your head. Obviously, there's a certain lack of polish, with stuff like the lodge looking like it was just dropped into a half-finished environment, but once you head inside, the more impressive aspects of Genesis really shine. All of the furniture and decor has gotten the Star Wars treatment. It's still like the original building interior at a glance, but when you pay attention to the details, it's just so cool seeing stuff like an astromech turned into a plant pot, or all these cool Star Wars character portraits on the wall. Oh, and the head of an ATST in the basement, because why not? Now, of course, the cohesion and immersion breaks when you step back outside. A lot of the architecture looks like it was kind of slapped onto the existing game's buildings, so you definitely get the sense that this game is wearing a Star Wars skin more than being Star Wars built from the ground up. And while that's not necessarily the case for everywhere in the city, where it does stand out, it becomes a bit obvious. Now, things are much better when it comes to the quality of the Star Wars character models, the weapons, the armor sets, the items, and just browsing through the character customization options at the start. It was insane how well modded and detailed these characters are. They easily rival the game's actual content. Of course, I had to pick a Gungan as my main character, but there's plenty of other Star Wars species to pick from, and Starfield's character customization tools are still fantastic. So even if none of the new models are to your liking, you can still craft something custom that fits the theme of the mod. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, it's a bit of a mixed bag, and it's not necessarily the mod's fault. It is, after all, trying to make Starfield a fun and engaging combat game, which in my opinion it was never to begin with. Now, the starting gear that you get with this mod list is pretty weak, or the difficulty of the game has been ramped up to just some absurd level. My first combat encounter was basically me dying instantly to what are supposed to be basic tutorial enemies. I even turned down the mod list difficulty options and was still getting deleted almost instantly, but eventually I actually made it through the first fight, and it ended up being pretty cool taking out some bounty hunters. And it really made me think that in Starfield there really was a lack of intrigue around the various factions for the game. They were all just kind of generically space piratey or space miners and kind of blended together. But with Genesis, I mean, there's still a lot of different factions mishmashed together, but there's also stormtroopers, rebels, other recognizable factions mixed into the chaos. The result is a bit more clearly defined groups or factions of people in the universe. Still a little bit cloudy, admittedly, but better than the base game. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, things are again hit and miss. Weapons don't really have functional sights, and hipfire is very inaccurate. It's not a problem when you get a weapon with a scope, but until you do, it's a bit tricky. But to be fair, the original game's balance was way too easy, to the point that the combat is universally boring. And Genesis seems to fix this a bit more mid-game, although it clearly needs some tweaking early game so you're not just getting deleted. Now, of course, there are also Lightsabers, which got a big overhaul with the latest update. To be honest though, melee combat in Bethesda games has never been that great, and while the mod list does a pretty good job of making it look more authentic to Star Wars, it's still kind of rigid and simplistic. That said, I'm also not really expecting some sort of crazy deep lightsaber gameplay like you might get from a Star Wars Jedi game, so I think it generally fits the mod list well. Now, while you can certainly pinpoint all the areas where Genesis doesn't quite do a good enough job of covering up the Starfield under the surface, I think it's gotten to a point where it really is starting to feel like a decent quality open world Star Wars RPG, the game of so many Star Wars nerds' dreams. And for all their faults, Bethesda are great at creating compelling open world games with extensive modding support. Starfield always felt like a Star Wars adjacent game on day one, arcadey spaceship combat, that gravity drive effect that looked very similar. Genesis just kind of gives it that final shove over the line. It's not perfect, but it looks miles beyond the last time I loaded up a bunch of Star Wars mods to try and turn Starfield into a Star Wars game. This is like a huge leap in the right direction, and it gives me confidence that there might actually be a really bright future for Star Wars Genesis. Now, with that said, if you want to check out Genesis for yourself, there is an issue that we're going to need to discuss. This is a massive mod list. My install for it was 122 gigabytes. And if you don't have a paid Nexus Mods account, you're going to have to babysit the entire install process. If you have fast internet and Nexus Premium, it's somewhat painless, but as mod lists like Genesis become more and more popular, the challenges in downloading them will need to get solved. You might decide that it's not worth trying to download such a massive mod list if you have to babysit it for hours. On the plus side, Genesis was one of the easiest mod lists I've ever installed and got up and running. There's almost always some sort of little thing I gotta fix or tweak or modify just to get things loading properly. The mod list author has done a great job of simplifying the process to be as streamlined as possible, and aside from Windows 11's hyperactive protection tools trying to block the Genesis installer, I had zero issues getting everything running, and it was almost entirely automated. By comparison, it took me an entire day in some cases to get mod lists for Skyrim and Fallout working properly, let alone getting in to actually play them and dialing in all the mod settings to my liking. Aside from the early game difficulty, Genesis is basically perfect out of the box, and I don't think you have to spend a ton of time tinkering to get it running to your satisfaction. Now, if Genesis just isn't enough Star Wars modding for you, well, I got good news. Kyber is an amazing mod system for Star Wars Battlefront 2, and it's basically updating the game, growing the player population, and kind of being like a spiritual Battlefront 3 to a degree. It's honestly incredible, and you should check out that video right here. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap signing off.